For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Winter storms and frigid temperatures have caused the deaths of at least 47 people across the U.S., from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Lakes region to New York, south to Mississippi and Florida. The hardest hit is Tennessee, recording at least 14 deaths. Oregon's recorded at least 13 deaths, the latest a family electrocuted after a tree branch fell on a power line, killing 3, including a teenager, and injuring a baby during an ice storm. Deaths have also been recorded in Arkansas, Illinois, Kansas, Mississippi, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Wisconsin. Winter warnings are impacting tens of millions of people across the U.S. and parts of at least 24 states. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke in Davos at the World Economic Forum Wednesday and blasted world leaders he accused of being hell-bent on raising climate emissions as the planet faces climate catastrophe after climate catastrophe.
As climate breakdown begins, countries remain hell-bent on raising emissions. Drought, storms, fires, and floods are pummeling countries and communities.
He also urged nations to pursue a just transition off of fossil fuels and warned of the dangers of unregulated AI and global conflicts, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Mideast tensions are escalating. Pakistan's Air Force launched retaliatory airstrikes in Iran today, allegedly targeting militant positions. The attack killed at least 9 people, an official told Iranian state TV. Among the dead are 4 children and 3 women. The strikes follow Iran's attacks Tuesday on Pakistani soil that killed 2 children. Palestinian medics say an Israeli airstrike on a home killed 16 people in Gaza, half of them children, in the southern town of Rafah, where Israel's forced people to flee to as a safe area, crowding some 1.3 million Palestinians in the southern region, many living in tents in winter weather. Meanwhile, there's no word on whether medicines that entered the territory yesterday as part of a deal brokered by France and Qatar have been distributed to those who need it, including dozens of hostages held by Hamas. Aid delivery is reportedly difficult due to Israel's attacks and communications blackouts in parts of Gaza. Democrats held a news conference Wednesday with the families of Israeli and American hostages in Hamas captivity. Some 6 Americans remain. Liz Nathali, an aunt of the toddler Abigail, who was released from captivity, blasted the Israeli government's handling of hostage negotiations, accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of stonewalling for political gain.
There have been several deals that have been worked out with Hamas that included staggered release of our hostages. These holdups have been from the Bibi Netanyahu government. We are here as families. We are not diplomats. We are not politicians. But what we see is that these interests are political. And when he tells the public that he wants to release and bring these loved ones home and all the hostages, the lack of action to bring home these loved ones clearly demonstrates to us that he wants to keep this war going to remain in office.
Families called on the Biden administration to push Israel to end its war in Gaza and pursue a full hostage release. Lawmakers are making headway in passing a continuing resolution to keep the government running at least into March or face a shutdown by Friday. Farah Siddiqui reports.
With 2 days left to avoid a government shutdown, the Senate pushed forward with a procedural vote on a funding stopgap. There is still risk of a brief shutdown if the Senate can't get unanimous agreement to fast-track a continuing resolution, but Speaker Mike Johnson is signaling leadership support in the House.
After weeks of hard-fought negotiations, we achieved a strong top-line agreement that allows our Appropriations Committee and all those who work on this to complete the appropriations process. It's an important part of keeping the government running.
The CR would fund the Transportation, Defense, Agriculture, and Energy departments until March 1st and the remaining agencies until March 8th. Meanwhile, Johnson is taking a tough stance in border policy negotiations with the White House. President Joe Biden is still pushing for his big foreign aid package, but agreement on that depends on an immigration deal that the right wing in the House has signaled they oppose. I'm Farah Siddiqui for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
The Justice Department is expected to release its investigation into law enforcement's failed response to the Uvalde school shooting in Texas in 2022. After a young gunman carried out a massacre at the school, barricading himself in a classroom, local forces waited more than an hour outside as he continued to shoot children, ultimately killing 19 children and 2 teachers. Arguments were heard at the Supreme Court over a case that could have far-reaching implications over the federal government's ability to regulate industries. Christopher Martinez reports.
The 2 cases are about what's called the Chevron doctrine, named after the most often cited case in U.S. law, more often than Brown versus Board of Education or the recently overturned Roe versus Wade. The Chevron case involved the 1963 Clean Air Act, with a 1984 landmark ruling that says courts should defer to agencies when the law is ambiguous. Lawyer Roman Martinez presented the case, saying the Chevron doctrine encourages agency overreach by removing checks on executive power.
Chevron violates the Constitution. Article 3 empowers judges to say what the law is. It requires them to interpret federal statutes using their best and independent judgment. Chevron undermines that duty.
Justice Elena Kagan pushed back with hypothetical questions, like who should make complicated decisions about artificial intelligence, or whether something is a drug or a dietary supplement.
And it's best to defer to people who do know, who have had long experience on the ground, who have seen 1,000 of these kinds of situations.
Some of the more conservative justices, Neil Gorsuch, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh, seemed sympathetic to the plaintiff's view that Chevron gives too much power to the executive branch. I'm Christopher Martinez.
I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.